Welcome, everyone, to this briefing brought to you by Israel Defense and Security Forum, IDSF. In Hebrew, our name is Abitchonistim. IDSF is the leading Israeli organization advocating for strong national security-oriented policies to guide the state of Israel. Thank you, of course, to all of our viewers and supporters for tuning into this briefing. It's a great privilege to be able to bring you behind the headlines. We're a little bit of a different spot than usual. As I've mentioned on past briefings, every now and then we try to bring groups down to the Gaza border to really allow them to experience what happened down there. And we did such a tour most of today. And everyone is encouraged who's watching this briefing, as I've mentioned, to come to Israel to really understand what's happening. And if you can't come, sponsor a child, a grandchild, a friend to come to really experience and connect on the ground, which compares to nothing else. These briefings give you just a little piece of what's happening in Israel. I'm very happy to be joined by the head of IDSF Research, Or Yisachar. You see on the screen Moshe Davis. We're sharing a screen today, so don't be confused. This is Or Yisachar. Or, thank you so much for joining. We have a lot to talk about right now, and especially with the State of the Union and everything that is happening and being questioned in terms of the U.S. support for Israel. Or what can you share with us about that?
Yes, first of all, it's great to be here again. And Moshe, very gracious to have me on once again. We are here in southern Israel, actually, right in front of the Gaza Strip. If you walk outside, you literally see the Gaza Strip. And we had an extremely significant tour today with a group of people who came mostly from the U.S. to really tour the Western Negev, as it's now called, not Gaza envelope anymore. And we actually toured the base, one of the bases near Gaza that was very badly hit by terrorists until it was bravely liberated by combat soldiers who came to their rescue and by soldiers who were present in the base. We visited Kfar Aza, actually a community who was very badly hit. The row of houses actually was nearest to the fence. Was the place from which they actually kidnapped the most Israelis, including, unfortunately, Yotam Chaim, Alon Shamris, and others who were kidnapped right into the Gaza Strip. And the other houses there actually became some sort of a museum. Some people, it's quite a controversial issue among evacuees, I can tell you that. Some don't fancy the idea of what they call war tourism, of people coming to the communities and to see with their own eyes. But the fact they are interested in coming, and myself, is when you visit Israel and you go to these communities, it's just shocking to see it in your own eyes. Houses burned to the ground. You can actually see black walls. It was that bad. And one of them actually chose to make a museum or some sort of a memorial site out of the home where a couple, like her daughter and her boyfriend, were very brutally murdered. You can still see bullet holes on the walls, and they hung on the walls the last WhatsApp messages. So it was very, very powerful. We visited the Nova Music Festival memorial site in Re'im. So all these things were extremely powerful. And once you visit Israel, you're very welcome to join, really see it in your own eyes. And I think today we would mostly like to discuss the State of the Union address, the Biden administration's latest statements, the policies, the intention to construct a port in Gaza to deliver humanitarian aid, whether or not American armament will still be supplied to Israel. And I think really there is a common trait, I think, that is typical to again, not to go overly political here. I'm just trying to analyze what probably the Israeli administration sees and what I think the most Israeli public considers as the U.S. administration recently sort of pivoting away from the very strongly pro-Israel line that they had past October 7 into increasingly in the past few weeks into a mode of, rather than October 2023, a mode of November 2024. And it's pretty evident. Just before the State of the Union, we had statements actually by U.S. officials leaked to the press, basically talking about, it's time to reinstate American leadership and Israel can't go on like this anymore and we're losing our friends in the world, etc., while continuing to supply armaments to Israel and veto votes in the UN, etc. But in the end, it is evident that the statements made by the U.S. administration recently really do reflect a trend of sort of being critical toward Israel in order to try to win over, in my opinion, to try to win over some voters who were extremely critical of the almost unconditional support by the Biden administration to Israel since October 7. And then we went to State of the Union. Now, I counted before this webinar using word count, not word by word, but I counted 6,446 words delivered by President Biden during the State of the Union address. There is a word count in Word. Don't worry, I didn't.
Does that include the hot mic part at the end?
I don't think so. No. But not the small talk in the beginning as well. But 6,446 words, not a single word about Iran's nuclear program. Not a single word. Didn't mention Iran. So what I'm saying is that he may just, very briefly refer to Iran as part of the Middle East, but hello, Iran is striving to enrich uranium to 90% enriched uranium, which is weapons grade. It is overtly supporting terrorism. The Iranian leader tweeted out the Nova Festival partygoers video for them of them fleeing the site. Tweeted it out by saying, with God's help, the Zionist regime will be eradicated with the help of Palestinian terrorist groups. This is the same message actually said 4 days before the massacre. We can talk about that. Then hosted a Hamas delegation. And ever since, the Iranian leader, Iranian president, the Iranian foreign minister go around the Middle East and basically just, threaten Israel and even threaten the United States. The foreign minister was in the United Nations in New York City, basically saying the United States will not be spared if it continues to support Israel. It will continue to strike them, strike their bases, etc. So what I'm saying is that it seems like the Biden administration, with its support to Israel, would not like to enter into a confrontation with Iran. And I believe, in my opinion, that's the wrong strategy. Pressuring Israel into concessions, that's the wrong strategy. We saw in the State of the Union, the part where, and that's quite typical of, especially, let me say it this way, people who would like to show they're pro-Israel by, of course, saying the obvious things. What happened on October 7 was terrible, etc. And then, long description of what Israel does wrong. And that's problematic, I think, to Israel, trying to analyze it from a political and military perspective, saying that how we should be careful, not targeting civilians, how we cannot have 30,000 more dead Palestinians. That would be a red line. That's what he said in an interview, subsequent interview to MSNBC. And my immediate response, said it in the media, in a media interview, actually, where they asked me, and I said that I'm saying it unfortunately. It gives me no pleasure in saying that it seems to me that President Biden is parroting Iranian propaganda. And it seems, out of the question that I would be saying such a thing just a few months ago. And I'm saying he probably didn't say it voluntarily, but involuntarily, it seems to me like parroting Iranian propaganda, because the number 30,000 is actually based on Hamas's own figures. And it has become, I'm sure he had all the good intentions, but I'm saying it has become some sort of a common wisdom to just quote UN reports, and UN reports are based on media reports, and media reports are based on Hamas figures. And if you check the IDF figures, they talk about 12, 13,000 terrorists who were killed. And they didn't give any estimate about the civilians. In our website, warisrael.org, I really welcome you visiting it. All of the war stats are there. Ever since November, we really took the initiative and within a very short period of time, uploaded this database, warisrael.org. Please do send it to your friends. It's extremely important. It has not only all the war stats, but also quite a bit of war stories and bravery, heroism stories, and all the analysis we're talking about in these briefings can be found there.
We'll make sure to get that link out. And again, this is a good plug for those of you who are not on our mailing list to sign up for the mailing list. We send out the link all the time to make sure to get that. Absolutely. Or let me ask you a question. It seems to be, as the U.S. elections ramp up, there's a bigger and bigger question about the extent to which the administration is supporting Israel. Do you think that this question mark about their support and these harsh statements is purely politics internal to the U.S.? Yeah. Or do you think they're potentially changing some type of approach with Iran. Meaning, if it's just internal politics, then hopefully behind the scenes, when push comes to shove, the U.S. will show up.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if it represents a broader policy change,
Mm-hmm.
that's obviously much more catastrophic.
Yeah, I think it's a mix, to be honest. It's kind of a cocktail of, a political motive toward November 2024 and basically a worldview that I don't share, which is appeasement and diplomacy as the one and only means of resolving conflict. We see it, the European Union of today. So it seems to me like that the worldview that American troops on the boots on the ground can be avoided by appeasing the aggressors in the region didn't seem to work neither during the Eisenhower administration or the Carter administration or the Clinton administration nor the Bush administration nor the Obama administration. So I'm not sure this is the correct strategy this time. And to be honest, this is. I'm aware that I'm speaking to an American audience. I'm trying not to get into politics here. I'm just saying, in general, it seems to me that appeasement is not the proper way to go about it to solving the Iranian problem. What I'm recognizing is that the Biden administration is attempting to probably find a way out of the situation. And some of it derives from a very real worldview that I just don't share, like the two-state solution that Biden keeps pushing, Anthony Blinken, spokesperson on the part of the administration. And I think they're saying it out of a sheer belief that this is actually the way to resolve the conflict, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But it's also important to highlight how unrealistic it is. So we have that. We have the plan to construct a port right on the Gaza. It will take, they estimate, between 45 and 60 days. And very interestingly, an American demand from Israel to sign a document, a memorandum that says that pledges that where Israel pledges not to use American armaments during an operation in Rafah in a way that violates international law or endangers civilians unnecessarily. And failing to do so would risk, a ban on the part of the U.S. not to use American arms during an operation Rafah or Philadelphia route. And I'm assuming there would be no issue for Israel to sign such a memorandum. That's what we're doing in anyhow. So that would be, as we say in Hebrew, bursting an open door. So these things are, I think, would be a challenge for the Israel leadership. So I've focused very heavily on the U.S. and let's open it to questions very soon. And I'm just saying that Israel should not lose sight of the most important issue here, which is finishing the job, ordering over 1 million Palestinians to evacuate northward. If Egypt ever opens the Rafah crossing, that would be better off. That would allow Palestinians to flee to, let's say, Europe, elsewhere, temporarily, I think, until the whole Gaza story is wrapped up, and start immediately an operation in Rafah, conquer the Philadelphia route. This is basically the golden route through which all the Iranian arms came into Gaza by Egyptians looking the other way and allowing this to happen. They didn't fall down from the moon. Iranian armaments, long-range missiles, grenades, even GoPro cameras, all of these things came through the Rafah crossing and the underneath tunnels. And the IDF absolutely must have boots on the ground there. We don't have any reason to believe that international forces can do the work as effectively. And then start handing out humanitarian aid themselves. I don't think the U.S. plan to construct a port in Gaza is that bad, to be honest, as long as it serves the Israeli interest, which is to have Israeli screening, Israeli eyes, Israeli vetting on anything coming into Gaza, really anything coming into Gaza. If they do that, it really doesn't matter, as Amir Avivi, General Avivi says, it doesn't really matter if it comes through the sea, through the ground, through the air. It doesn't really matter if it's airborne humanitarian aid or through land crossing, as long as it goes through Israeli eyes, vetting, screening. All these things are extremely important to avoid repeating the October 7th scenario. I suggest we just open it up to questions, right?
Yes. So thank you, of course, to everyone who has submitted questions in email. Or let's talk about the construction of this port for a moment. If you think there would be some type of necessity for the IDF to monitor this port and be involved in its processes, so then de facto, we're talking about the idea of being in Gaza for many, many years. I mean, you don't build the port just for a couple of days. And that's basically if that were to be the system, the U.S. is giving a stamp to the IDF staying in Gaza.
Yeah, and either that or the U.S. is interested in handing out the humanitarian aid themselves. I think in any scenario, the IDF must be handed that assistance, the humanitarian aid. I mean, right now, what happens is that humanitarian aid flows into Gaza, either airborne or by land crossings. That in turn goes to UNRWA, that is handing it out. We all saw how bad and ineffective UNRWA is. And then it goes to actually, in some cases, Hamas itself. It reaches the hands of Hamas by UNRWA delivering it, and somehow it ends up with all those street gangs and mayhem that's going on there. You all saw the truck and how a mob of Palestinians stormed it. So all these things happen on a daily basis in terms of like UNRWA handing humanitarian aid, and then somehow it ends up in the hands of Hamas. I think even there was a stat by the IDF, the most humanitarian aid somehow ends up in the hands of Hamas. So if the US would like to establish a port, be my guest. But I think the IDF must insist that it runs the port or is surveilling the running of the port, manages the everyday screening and vetting. In that sense, there's no I don't see any reason why not.
Now, there's a report in the Times of Israel that when the IDF is involved in humanitarian causes, it puts them at risk and soldiers get hurt. So, to what extent should this be the role of the IDF to facilitate the transfer of goods and put the Israeli soldiers at risk,
Yeah.
as opposed to Israel just saying, you want to build a port, great, you want to get rid of UNRWA, great, but there has to be another international entity to be involved.
I think such an international entity must be involved. The IDF needs to run it, that like the efforts, but in the end, an international entity that would not be UNRWA. UNRWA has to be dissolved. We saw how UNRWA is, very intrinsically linked to terrorism and to Hamas. Just to give you an idea, 25 out of 27 members of the UNRWA worker union are Hamas members. 80% of UNRWA have workers have some sort of connection to Hamas. It's not going to work. Nor the Palestinian Authority nor anything else. But we can find an international organization that will be new, that would be composed of, let's say, of both US, France, UAE, even Saudi Arabia, in like as part of a broad normalization effort. I think that could be actually leading to a positive result and a positive outcome of Saudi Arabia and other pragmatic Arab countries involved in the future of Gaza. That could, Israel can very easily say, voila, what do you want? We are allowing anyone to import humanitarian aid into Gaza. There is no blockade. You can deliver any aid you want. But in the end, if the IDF hands out the humanitarian aid and manages or runs the whole effort, that would mean that the IDF is actually running the show. This is the most important part, I think, because Palestinians right now are fearing that the IDF or Israel is not serious enough about defeating Hamas. And I'm saying it despite the pictures you see from Gaza. In the end, if you don't finish the job, if you don't go to Rafah, if you don't finish off Hamas once and for all, then the Palestinians would ask themselves, hang on, if Israel is not going to finish the job, how am I going to cooperate with the IDF handing out humanitarian aid? I would be seen as a traitor, and then following day, Hamas would hang me, throw me off the rooftop. So I think Israel has a responsibility here to show seriousness and start handing out humanitarian aid itself.
Sure. Okay. A lot of questions coming in. Again, thank you to everyone for sending all of these questions. Someone had wrote in a very interesting point. Once we're kind of build a port and open up Gaza to the Mediterranean Sea, why stop just bringing things in? Why not give Gazans the opportunity? Grant them passports and travel the world, emigrate to any country that they want. Why do you think the international community of the U.S. won't automatically go to that direction?
Let's just think why the queue in which people stand to welcome Gaza refugees is not very long. In fact, nobody is standing in this queue. And let's ask ourselves, why is this the case? Because in spite of all the declarations and all the statements and all the condemnations, in the end, everybody understands that the Gaza refugees mean, I don't know if disaster, but they mean trouble. And that's a very good reason why not just Europe, Arab countries would not like to welcome them. Egypt actually built, and if you go to Google Earth, if it's updated enough, you'll see a satellite image of a fence built like a sort of an enclave inside Egyptian territory, a fence constructed by the Egyptian government along from the Gaza border deep into Sinai and then into the Mediterranean Sea, toward the Mediterranean Sea, to basically sort of to fence out any territory that the Gazans might penetrate through and might breach through the fence, and to prevent a scenario where Gazans just breach into all out Egyptian territory. So they would like to sort of confine it into a given territory. It's that bad. The Egyptians do not want Gazans. They don't want a Muslim Brotherhood, and they don't want any more Palestinian refugees. Jordan and Egypt actually threatened to withhold the peace agreement with Israel if they are forced to welcome Gaza refugees. My position is this: Jordan and Egypt is one thing. They have their own troubles, but I would like to see Gazans as any other person in the world. Any person in the world issues a passport, files an application, submits an application on the website, and if you meet the criteria and you are interested to immigrate and the country is interested in welcoming you, bingo, you are free to go. And it seems to me bizarre that anyone can travel. Take a look at Europe and even North America. Plenty of immigrants from the Middle East and North Africa. But somehow when Palestinians immigrate, that's considered to be Nakba or ethnic cleansing. I just fail to understand that if the Palestinian person from Gaza is interested in immigrating, why not allow them to do so? I'm not saying forced exile. I'm not saying ethnic cleansing. All I'm saying is that allow them to do what you allow any other person in the world to do. And think about what situation Ukrainian refugees found themselves in, and Syrian refugees. Imagine Poland, Romania, Moldova blocking the border crossings with Ukraine with tanks, blocking the possibility for Ukrainians to flee their country during wartime. I mean, this is what Egypt is doing, and I think it's a disaster.
Okay, so here in the Middle East, there's more than one country, Israel. There are many, many, many Arab countries surrounding Israel. They have populations that speak the same language, that are culturally very similar to the Gazans. And yet the U.S., far, far, far from away, sees its responsibility to send aid across the world. How is that perceived, do you think, by the Arab world here, the Arab countries here? Meaning, rather than Egypt stepping up, Saudi Arabia stepping up, Qatar stepping up, whether we'd want that or not, how do they perceive the fact that the U.S. is swooping in and offering all of this free aid?
I think that it can just be interpreted as a price for terrorism in the end. I mean, you carry out something that terrible as October 7, and then what you get is humanitarian aid and even, wholesale condemnations to Israel. Qatar has been supporting the Palestinians and Hamas for years now. It's sending the wrong message, I think, to humanitarian aid, as President Biden said, should not be conditioned upon anything. It should just be supplied. But I do think that the Gazans should, as I think one of the users here, one of our listeners very cleverly wrote it, de-radicalization. And that's absolutely right. I mean, in order to, have trade, I'm not saying humanitarian aid to any population. I'm saying in general, Gaza should not be reconstructed until they de-radicalize. It's not a magic wand. It's not going to happen within a day, but it's a process that we'll have to undertake in order to get any assistance, any reconstruction. Arab countries will not throw that kind of money unless they see change and reform, and neither should the U.S. do it, to be honest.
Sure. And again, thank you for everyone for sending in your questions. And before we go to the last question, just a reminder for those of you who are tuning in late or potentially watching this on the replay, you did change the clocks in the States. We haven't changed them here in Israel. So for the next 3 weeks, we're going to be an hour different than previously, 11 a.m. Eastern time. Let's go to our final question right now. Oregon, thank you so much for joining me. We're kind of all just waiting what's going to happen at the Rafah crossing, when Israel is going to go in. What do you think the breaking point is? Like, there's this default ceasefire. We're kind of handing Hamas the ability to recoup. When is that gonna end? What's gonna happen?
I gotta tell you, in my opinion, we should have entered Rafah 2 months ago, even 3 months ago, and I failed to understand this delay. At first, I interpreted it as a sort of bargaining chip, some of a leverage with Hamas to be used, as a cudgel. Unless you do one, two, three, we invade Rafah, and we do to Rafah what we did to Bet Hanun, Bet Lahia, and Gaza, and Dir al-Balach, and Khan Yunis, and all the Gaza Strip. I don't see any reason why not finish the job and go to Rafah, much like we went to all other Gaza cities. And to be honest, I fail to understand that. I mean, there must be some sort of reason, but in my opinion, that started off as a cudgel to improve Israel's position in negotiations over hostages. And we all want to see them home as soon as possible. We all gotta remember the 134 people who are trapped there in inhumane, subhuman conditions, in underground tunnels, in cages, they barely are given any food, according to reports. It's just terrible. They're away from their families, no Red Cross visiting. And in that sense, I think Israel must finish the job. Israel must finish the job and go to Rafah. And I think two things that could be holding it back is one, Ramadan, and two, pressure on the part of the U.S. administration. For some reason, Rafah has become a symbol or a sort of cudgel to warn Israel against doing it. I fail to understand that, to be honest. I mean, if you don't make such a big of a deal of it, it would not be such a big of a deal. I remind you that over 1.5 million Palestinians immigrated southward from Gaza, from Deir al-Balah, from all the Gaza Strip into Rafah. I don't see any issue for them moving back northward into areas like along the beach that would enable the IDF to operate around Rafah. I just expect the U.S. to show more leadership to give Israel the back that it needs. And maybe just finish on that point, I am a bit worried that in the next steps, the pressure will be such that Israel will be forced into some sort of a concession. But I'm confident, judging by the statements coming out of Israeli leadership and the IDF, and we as IDSF, we are pushing toward finishing the job, going to Rafah, going to Philadelphia route. And I think we owe it to ourselves and to the people who are living in this part of Israel to ensure that October 7 never happens again. That's I think, the only way to do it.
For sure. Or Yisachar, head of IDSF Research, thank you so much for joining. Thank you for all of our viewers and supporters for tuning into this briefing. We will be back with you tomorrow, 11 a.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. here in Israel. Until then, stay safe, stay strong. Take care, everyone.